So hi everyone. We've got a really interesting, contentious subject this week. It's kind of a rife debate in the creative industries at the moment because we're navigating one of the busiest job markets we've ever seen. So, welcome to NDA. This week's episode is taking interview tasks to task. So I'm really excited to have some lovely guests with me this week. We've got a mix of kind of change makers, theorizers, people who've been on the ground, done that work for interview, and everyone's bringing a slightly different point of view. So I'm going to kick off with some intros. If everyone can just a quick line about themselves and how they relate to the topic. Nikki, do you want to start us off?
Hi. Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. So my name's Nikki Lyle. I am a creative recruiter. I'm also quite actively involved in the industry in general. So I'm also involved a lot in mentoring for like D&AD, advertising. And my opinion on design tasks is my own observations of ways in which I've seen they have been of a benefit to some people in the industry.
Cool.
I am JC Evans. I'm a senior designer. I work up in Birmingham in kind of the charity non-profits world. And my opinion, I'm not too sure on my opinion of design tasks, but I've completed one and it was not a good experience.
Hi everyone, I'm Faz. I am a junior branding designer and I have done a design task in the past with a pretty positive experience, I would say. Yeah, that's me.
Great. Hi everyone, my name's Luke Woodhouse. I'm creative director at Ragged Edge. We're a branding agency for change makers. And when we were recruiting people, we wouldn't ask anyone to do a creative task to get the job.
Sweet. So a little bit of context, and we are absolutely going to delve into those stories and opinions a little bit more. But I'm Katie Cadwell. My pronouns are she, her. I am the host and the steerer of discussion today. But for full disclosure, I have completed a design task and I did get the job off the back of it. For the sake of this and all future discussions, just think of me as like an impartial stirrer of the pot. So I thought we would kick off with, Nikki, if it's all right, kind of an objective description of interview tasks.
Yeah, of course. So I think the thing with design tasks is they're usually at a time where the interviewer may be trying to decide either between a few candidates who they offer the job to, the task can be set, or I've had instances where clients have had one candidate that they're considering, but they may have some reservations about their skill set. And the task is actually a way to bridge the gap for the candidate to prove that they do have the skills that they might not be able to demonstrate from their existing experience in the industry. So it's a way to kind of help them demonstrate those skills.
And out of like all the applications that you see, could you put a rough guess on how many are asking for an interview task?
Yeah, I would say maybe about half of jobs are asking for people to create design tasks.
It's quite a lot. I think that'll be quite surprising to people because there aren't many people who come out and say that they're asking for these design tasks. And what I'm hearing on socials is some of those big agencies are asking too. So I think just as the story we have here that probably relates most closely to what I'm seeing in the DMs, Josie, could you chat about your experience doing an interview task, please?
Yeah, so I was like looking to move jobs, and one came up in the city that I was planning to move to. So I was like, this is great. Got all my portfolio ready. Like, we don't have like having to spend your evenings like putting together your portfolio. It takes a long time. Sent it off, and I've got the whole like email chain here, so I might refer to it a little bit. Sent it off, just like did my like kind of cover letter as part of the email and sent my portfolio. And then I didn't realise this until I looked earlier, but it was about a month until I heard back. And then they were like, hi, thanks for sending it through. We've had over like 50 applications, which I don't know if that's loads or not. They said it's been really difficult. So you're through to the next stage. We're going to set you like a little design task. So I was like, okay, like that's fair enough. So then they sent it through the next day. And even when I read the design task, I was like, that's quite a loose brief. So the brief was, we'd like you to design a brand and front cover of 2 spreads for a fictional Cardiff-based magazine called Culture. The subject of the magazine can be up to you. We don't expect you to write anything or take any photography. Lauren Ipson's fine. And we're really looking for bulletproof layout and a bit of editorial flair. Like everything, like tight colours, everything's your choice. Which I was kind of like, really happy to do it. It was like quite a few years ago. So I was like kind of moving from like junior to midweight. But I was like, if you're testing my typographical like skills by not giving me any type, I can kind of do whatever I want. Like Lauren Ripson, I can make it look, if it doesn't fit on the page, I'll just delete a few words. So I did that. And I think they actually only gave us like, so I think they sent that on, I think they gave like just over a week to do it, which again, if you're working full time and you've got like at that point, we were doing like long distance in my relationship. So like most of my weekends were spent like traveling. So, and I think I actually just couldn't fit it in. So I actually took annual leave to do it. I took a day annual leave. So did it all, sent it across, literally had nothing. Like nothing at all. But like a few days later, I was like emailed again. I was like, hi, like I know it's a big file. Is it just like, if you want me to send it in another way, just like let me know. Literally nothing again. And then like it left it a few more weeks, and I was like, I don't mind if I haven't got the job, fine. But can you just like kind of say that you received it, or just give me a little bit of feedback? Because like I've obviously taken the time to do it, and like literally never ever heard anything ever. And I did actually find out, because I then went into kind of like stalker mode, and they actually just promoted one of their junior designers to midweight. So I was like, I don't know how many people they asked to do this task. And it was also like, the task was before the interview, which I think's probably quite strange. And then to make things even worse, after like keep stalking, they actually put another job out, and I like saw it on Instagram, and they kind of writ the whole blurb for the job, and then at the end wrote, no matter what, we will always get back to you. And I was just like, we actually, like, you know, when you like angry, like write a comment, and I was like, I'm just going to pause it, like leave it for an hour, and I'll come back and see if I want to like post it, to just like call them out, being like, I did a whole project for you, and you didn't even say thank you, like didn't even say. So yeah, that's kind of, I think that's probably the worst experience that you could probably get from it. But
how could they have made it any worse? That's terrible.
I know, it's like, don't even say thanks for sending it through. Like, you haven't got
So
it,
rude.
you don't like it. It's like, yeah, it's just rude. And I was just like, I don't know. I don't know how, or even if they'd been like, oh, this person hasn't sent it, I would be like, email them, just being like, have you done the brief? Like, we'd like to see what you've done. Just seems like, did they just set the tasks because they couldn't be bothered to go through all the portfolios? And yeah, and my portfolio as well had like a lot of typographical editorial work in. So it wasn't like they wanted some like web design and I hadn't got any web design in it. So it just seemed like a task for like a task's sake, which I don't know. I don't know how they would have gained anything more, like what was already in my portfolio, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good like reason for why we don't do them. I feel like if you can't see enough from the portfolio, then like you're not really looking properly or not asking the right questions. And I think setting it before the interview is particularly bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's like
someone
half like it's the personality, isn't it, of the person, and then if there is something you're unsure, maybe then you can go. But to do it before, kind of just seemed a bit lazy.
Yeah. I'd really like to add that a task being set before an interview is a red flag. No one should be doing tasks before they've even met you. We always say to clients, if you're going to set a design task, only a few hours worth of work is what you need to really be setting. You don't want someone coming up with a full identity, like a campaign, a rollout. That's, if you want someone to spend a few days, you should be paying them for their time. And it should only be set at like final stage where you're like, is this person really going to be perfect for the job? And really honouring everyone's time in the process.
Do you think they were using it as a way to weed people out? Like that's what they were trying to, who's serious about it? Let's just set a task and see.
Yeah, maybe, but I don't see how, like, they could have done that with the portfolios, unless they did want to see like who's really committed to like doing something and doing it well. But it does seem weird that they would do it even before like I could do all that work, spend all the time in it, and then I'll go to the interview and they just don't like me. Whereas
someone on Twitter said that it's actually a reflection on the creative director and like either a laziness or B, an inability to be able to judge work, which is a bit of a red flag if you're going to work for someone and have them judging your work all day, every day, which I feel like, Luke, maybe you can talk to that a little bit, because that's, it's something that's got to carry through into the agency.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the portfolio, you should be able to see enough and get an understanding for their ability and what they can do. I think one challenge we have is sort of like understanding people's roles in a team. So I always do like to see like the credits for a project, because obviously we understand that like nothing, like everything we do at Ragged Edge is collaborative, and for us it is good to understand, if you are a junior designer or a midweight designer, what's the structure of the team and what's your role. Like even if you didn't do everything, you contributed, and it's just that it's helpful to know. I can only imagine that there's a lack of trust on the creative director's side, that they sort of maybe don't trust that it's that person's work. I can't imagine what they would like. That would be the only thing that I can imagine would be a reason for doing it, which isn't a particularly pleasant one. But then I think if you interview someone, if you met someone, you should be able to ask those questions and get a good understanding. And you should be able to learn enough from the process. Like like Nikki says, like definitely don't do a creative task before an interview. You won't do that again, I don't think, would you?
Yeah, I've learned my lesson.
And I think it's worth mentioning that, Josie, you came from an agency that is well known, right? And I think that's some people's arguments is if you don't know the agency. Whereas Faz, you had like a slightly different experience because you hadn't long graduated and you were kind of freelancing. So maybe you tell your story, which is slightly more positive experience.
Yeah, so for me, I had just left an intern / freelance position at a studio, and I was moving into freelance work. At the time, I was lucky enough to have quite a bit of work, but I was still looking for a bit more. And so someone had recommended me a position at a venture capital who was looking for like an in-house designer, like a day a week. And so I had a meeting with them / interview. I showed them my portfolio, and the designer who recommended me had worked on the actual branding, and so I would be working on their internal stuff and rolling that out. So when I had the interview, I had no idea that they were going to ask me to do a task, but she kind of, the way she mentioned it was like, oh, we just want you to do like a little mini challenge, and we just want to see how you would work with the brand assets. And so the way it sounded a little like it was a small task, and I had the capacity as a freelancer to kind of take it on. So for me, I think the way I saw it was it's a short task, and the value of it was that I would have an ongoing client that was stable, especially as a freelancer. I feel like as a junior freelancer, being really like uncertain of the waters and kind of navigating all of that, I found that having a stable client was to my benefit. And so right after that meeting, she sent through the details of this mini challenge, as she puts it in quotes on her emails. And it was basically a two posts that they needed for LinkedIn and their newsletter. And they were just announcing something, and they just wanted me to play with their assets and just create those 2 tiles. Pretty easy task, took me about 2 hours. And at the back of my mind, I was thinking about, this as a, like, I was thinking if I did get the role, I'm going to bill them on my invoice for this work. And if I don't get the role, maybe it means that I'm not good enough, and therefore, I'll just like slowly recline. But I felt confident going into that. I had the support of the designer who had recommended me for that role. He was like, send it through to me, and once you've done it, I'll have a look before you send it through to them. So that was kind of reassuring to know. But yeah, I sent through the PDF. It was like 4 different options. They sent me an email back afterwards saying, we'd like to offer you the position for a 1-day-a-week engagement. And they were a great client, like that led me up, like that kept me busy up until when I moved into my full-time role at a company. And so when I did send them through my first invoice, I invoiced them for the time I spent on the task, which I'm really glad I did. And no one said anything, so I'm sure it was fine. Yeah.
That's top legend tactics, if you ask me. But I think the main difference between the 2 stories is Faz was working on live work. Theoretically, Josie was working on fictional. So I guess maybe, Nikki, you've got the most experience of what's most common, live projects or kind of fake briefs.
Yeah, this almost reminds me sometimes of when agencies pitch for free, and there's this whole, do you just pick a few agencies and pay each of them a lump sum for their time? Because obviously they're paying out for all this work, all their ideas, and submitting that. So I do wonder sometimes if that effect of work for free has somehow trickled down into design tasks being set. This is just a thought I've actually had on this call from hearing these discussions, which is a bit of food for thought, really. I'd love to hear other people's opinions on that, but not diverting away from this topic too much. But I also believe that what we should have is something that should be signed that says we're not going to use this idea or this concept on our own brand. Because I think there's a lot of lack of trust where people are saying, oh, I don't want you stealing my ideas, not crediting me, and then my work is being used and I'm not being paid for it. So I think there should be some kind of contract going around. I might even look into creating a guide that people can download and send over to a company and say, do you mind signing this just to protect my work? And then maybe a fee that's used if they do use it, just to protect creatives from feeling that they're sharing their ideas all the time. But I think something that Faz worked on is far more reasonable, where it's like, this is our design, here's some assets, can you put this together? We want to see what you'll be like on the job. I think that's far more reasonable than coming up with something like Josie had to do to prove her typography skills, which are evidently in her portfolio. Coming up with a project from scratch before an interview, that for me is completely wrong way of going about tasks.
What if Faz
I'd agree
hadn't got
entirely.
the job? Oh, sorry, Luke. Go on, you go.
Oh, no, I was just going to agree entirely with Nikki's point, and I think your suggestion of some sort of contract, or at least like rules for good, clear communication between the creative and the company, I think that's a brilliant shout. And I think your comparison between sort of free pitching and this creative task during an interview one is like a really smart one, and it's one that I thought about as well. Like, we don't do free pitches, and so that sort of fed into our sort of thinking behind like not asking people to do tasks, because it is very similar.
Yeah, and it sets a precedent that free work is okay, I think. And I think I've heard that a lot on the NDA social. So I guess my next question is, Faz does her work brilliantly, because I've worked with you and I know you do. And doesn't get the job, but then a month later, lo and behold, that work appears on their social channels. What can FAS do about that?
I feel like for me, if I saw that work being used at some point, I honestly feel like I would send an email to the person, just because I know that like my work, like as a freelancer, like that was my time spent, and like if they thought it was good enough to be used, that's clearly an asset that I created. I own that. And in hindsight, now now that I freelance for a bit longer and I've worked in the studio a bit longer, and I understand kind of, making sure you write that little footprint at the bottom. I think when I had created that work and I'm looking at that PDF now, I didn't write anything at the bottom that, kind of put that work as my ownership, and like technically they could have gone ahead and used it and put it on their socials, and I would have nothing to fall back on. So that's a big lesson for me. But I think I would have sent an email and possibly, sent an invoice as well, like after a very nice interaction with them. I don't think I'd be harsh about it, but yeah, it would be a bit funny if they didn't get back to me, kind of like how Josie had it. I have
think
no
that's
clue what else I'd do.
I think the thing that it made, because it's like that, like I thought exactly the same when I looked back at my PDF. I was like, I didn't put anything like this belongs to me, like do not use it. It kind of takes, whereas now I would never ever do that. Like if someone asked me to do an interview task before even an interview, I'd be like, what are you going to gain? But I think it kind of takes advantage of people that are like newer to the industry and younger in the industry, because like when you're at that junior level, you kind of feel like you can't really like, you'd be like, I need to do this to get the job. You can't really like speak out or kind of like stand up for yourself. And also like you don't really know the ways as much. So I think it does, especially my task, I felt it kind of took advantage of the level that it was going in at.
Yeah, I think we should have a trade-off of time. Money is one, thing that's valuable to compensate you. But I think, Josie, maybe if someone had set some time aside to actually giving you some proper feedback,
yeah, exactly,
recognition for you submitting the task, and then gave you feedback, you would have felt that it was worthwhile to help you with your career journey.
Because I think that's what, like, by the last email, I was like, I've obviously not got the job, but can you at least just even reply and say I haven't got the job, or just like having that feedback to know what I did wrong or what they didn't like would have been like really useful, and then would have meant at least my time was like well spent, because I didn't get anything from that time, like nothing at all. So yeah.
What do you think it did for your confidence, as jumping from one job to another is always pretty stressful, and then we add into the mix a little bit of creative direction?
Yeah, so like I was my confidence was always already, like, lots of different reasons, my confidence was like really, really low. So for me to like go and be like, I'm doing this, I'm moving jobs, was like quite a big thing. So then, and I think that like now I would have just picked up the phone and rang them and be like, why aren't you replying to me? But I couldn't do that then. I was like, I'm just sending these emails and just hoping someone's going to reply to me, probably because like I felt I couldn't take that rejection like kind of like face to face or like over the phone. But yeah, it just kind of, wouldn't say it made me feel worthless, but it's like what I've done is worthless. Like you've literally, it kind of, my impression of them is that they literally didn't care what I did. So it's like, why did you even bother like asking for me to do the task anyway? Because you either would have seen something in the portfolio and been like, oh, they're interesting. Yeah, it's just a weird way to do it. It's just all mixed up.
Luke, do you get back to everyone? I mean, I know you're not setting design tasks, but like Josie said, they had 50 candidates. Maybe like Nikki, I guess you can talk to that too. Is that right? Like how many, if you post a job ad, how many candidates are you getting, and what's the workload like to kind of the process of weeding out, I guess, the people that are a good match?
Yeah, I think we get about, I'm going to say like about 1,000. I think Lisa, I heard of people, she counted it up recently for a senior designer position. I think it was over 1,000. So we do try and keep track of them and reply to the people that aren't successful. But obviously that's quite a task, and then we do try and get back to everyone. We certainly get back to everyone that we speak to who make it to interview stage. Lisa has put in quite a really good process so that everyone does get proper feedback, there's proper communication, everyone knows where they are in the process at what time, and if anyone's not successful, then they have the opportunity to have a chat with Lisa and get the fuller feedback from everyone that they met over the course of the process. So yeah, we definitely. I'm pretty sure we don't get back to everyone who applies, but we get back to everyone who makes it through to interview stage.
And I
Which
guess
I think
I
is
have
what you would expect. That seems like
the minimum. No, you're all good.
Yeah, it's like it's just like being a nice person. Like that's what it comes down to. Like I think if you're going to set the task, like yeah, just think about if you were in their shoes and what you would expect from it.
Definitely. And I guess if you get asked to do a design task, and also I think, Nikki, how do people react to being asked to do a design task? So like Faz, you had a really good interview where you thought was going really well, and then they said, oh, actually, we just like you to prove yourself a little bit more. How did that make you feel?
I think for me, like, I felt like as a junior, I don't have enough experience to kind of or prove or like have a portfolio that can prove that I'm an incredible designer. And I think for me as well, doing that task was a little bit of a test as to how I was going to work with them, because I was, sending through this document, understanding what kind of clients there would be as well, but I did feel like I had to prove to them that I could understand their brand and actually apply their typography and assets that had already been created. I felt confident going into it. I felt like I could do it. I had a look at their stuff, and yeah, I felt confident enough to execute it. And when I sent through that document to the designer who had actually worked on the original branding, I felt like the feedback he gave me was like, this is great, you can send it through. And so I feel like I had enough support and connections, I guess, as well, which is a big thing, which I understand a lot of people might not have. Like the fact that I had someone that could mentor me through that little task to basically ensure I got this job was a huge thing. I'm sure for like after I actually left that job, I was reaching out to a few of my peers to see who would want to take on a freelance role. And some of them did actually do a task for the same venture capital that I had worked for, but the task that they were given, I looked at the brief afterwards because there was a friend who actually didn't get the role, and she had spent, I think she told me 2.5 days on this quite big presentation. And I had offered to her as well. I was like, I'll look over your document before you send it through, kind of because I felt like I understood the brand. She didn't send it through to me beforehand, and I wish she had, because the brief that they sent through to her wasn't clear at all. She hadn't sent questions asking them to clarify that brief, and so she'd spent this enormous amount of time working on a project on this presentation, which then got rejected, and she felt quite terrible about it, and I in turn felt terrible for recommending her to kind of go ahead with it. And I can see what the downfalls of doing that task is. I think if I had been given the brief, that brief was kind of it was under the brand architecture. It was like a sub brand, but the brand itself hadn't really established what this brand architecture is. And that's a bigger task for someone who's probably more senior to kind of tackle. And so to give it to a junior and be like, hey, figure out this really big problem is quite a terrible task to give. And I'm sure, like, from a branding point of view, like a creative director would understand that. But from a venture capital who has like a small team, they probably have no clue as to what their actual problem that they're dealing with is. And so if that task was given to me, I think I would have gone back with an email and been like, this is not the right task, and clearly I'm working on something that's going to go live, and so this is really a testament to what I need to do in order to prove myself. And so I'd ask for a different task. But yeah, that's where that was at.
Nikki, do you get people asking, like pushing back candidates? I know you mentioned that sometimes you kind of might suggest to studios that it's not the right time, but do you get candidates also pushing back and saying, this isn't right for my skills, or I work really well collaboratively and this feels quite tricky for me?
Yeah, we always try and manage people's expectations. So they'll be like, this company, if it gets to second stage, they'll set you a design task. But we always push back on our clients. I think because I've been in the industry for 10 years, when I was a more junior recruiter, I would be like, yeah, whatever you say. But now I'll say, this isn't really fair. This isn't very reasonable. You know, can you do something that's only going to take a few hours? If it's longer, compensate the designer. But something that Luke said earlier, which I thought was really interesting, if you want to avoid doing a task, make sure it's crystal clear what your involvement was on each project. I always say that's essential because people know, you know, if you've got a huge identity of a well-known brand in an agency that's quite well known, and chances are you're not going to be the main person that was managing all of that from concept to completion, etc. So if you're really clear as to what parts of the project you were involved in, then that might stop them feeling they have to set a task to get to know more about you and your skill set and like what you can do. So this is something I'd be mindful of when putting together your portfolio. Everyone says to me it's all about the voice of that creative, what they're bringing to the agency, to the role. So that's a way you could maybe design your portfolio so you may not be set it in the future.
It's actually really interesting, Nikki, that you say that, because the current position that I'm in, I'm at a studio in Sydney called A Company. When I had sent through my first portfolio, it actually had, as a junior, obviously, in the portfolio, it had a few pieces that I'd worked on at these big studios. And so when I had my interview, I talked that through. But I think at the end of the interview, my creative director probably thought, this doesn't really show who Faz is. Like, what does Faz do? What's her style? And so she actually asked me to send through a secondary portfolio, and then I had a secondary interview for that portfolio. And that work actually included a lot more of my university work, projects that I had worked on my own, and probably explain to her and prove to her, what kind of work I do, what I'm interested in, rather than, these big projects that I'd worked on at a studio as a junior, which was probably a much smaller role and probably told her a lot less about the kind of work I was capable of.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to follow on from that quickly is about passion projects and side hustles. And I prefer the term passion project because hustle just sounds like, oh my God, I've just done my day job. Now you want me to hustle? Like, go away. I don't want to do that. But work that you can put in, which is stuff that's created on your own terms. It's not the commercial stuff that pays the bills, etc. If you have any of that work that you can put in, like Faz just kind of referenced with the other portfolio that you got to present, then that gives them more of an indication as to who you are and other parts of you as a creative that you could bring to the studio and to the role.
That, I think, brings us very nicely to a great point we had on Twitter, which is barriers to the industry and the barriers and the kind of accessibility that design tasks flag. And I think like that's kind of down the similar vein of side hustles. But if we're asking people to complete interview tasks and they might be segueing from one industry to another, or they're a full-time carer, then how are they kind of supposed to manage that? And I know, Luke, you mentioned feeling like there are some accessibility barriers there.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, as an industry, as an agency, as everyone knows in design, we're looking for people from different backgrounds, from diverse backgrounds, and that's not only because it's a good thing to do, but because it's literally proven to make creative work better if you've got a diverse team. It's really, really important. And so, yeah, if we're encouraging people who maybe haven't got a traditional design background, or maybe, like you say, got other things going on outside their job, then asking them to do a design task makes it not as accessible for everyone. It's not an inclusive process. So that is one of the reasons that we avoid them as well. And I think, for us, if we're an agency who's championing diversity and always looking for different people, we can't be supporting people doing work outside of their normal hours.
Yeah, definitely. And like you mentioned, Josie, taking the day off work in order to complete it. And I think another argument that people often have is don't ask someone to do a design task, get them in on freelance. And I understand that as a theory. But what if doing some freelance means giving up your current role? So do you see that often, Nikki and Luke? Like, or have you ever considered that you're really interested in someone joining and you ask them to do some freelance work first?
No, I don't think we'd take that as an approach. Like we've hired freelancers to the permanent team off the back of a successful freelance stint, but that's more happy coincidence. And I don't think we would do that. I think our interview process, there's like 2 or 3 stages, and one thing we ask people to do in the final stage is to present work they already have, but from an earlier stage in the process. So what we ask for is first round creative concepts, and we want to see that presentation. So hopefully they have that presentation ready to go. It's not any extra work, but it shows us a bit more about them and their contribution at that early stage before it's been feedbacked to death by the client or overbearing creative director or whatever. So that's our way of like seeing a bit more of that designer's voice and personality and their vision for what they want to do, seeing that sort of earlier, rougher stuff. And we love seeing that. That's how we can sort of feel like we know the person and the designer well enough to make a good decision.
That's really interesting. I've never heard that approach before, to like do, because I think that's what I did think with mine. I was like, oh, going back to like how much have you actually contributed being a junior? But that's a really good way to kind of prove what you can do without having to do any extra work.
Also, looking at who sets design tasks, it's very rare. I work with like a lot of the big kind of branding agencies, but I also work with more like client side, in-house type roles. The big, more established agencies don't tend to set design tasks as much. And a lot of the time they hire people from similar types of agencies, not always, but there is a kind of common theme there. And it's more the client side roles or companies that don't maybe understand, I don't want to say don't understand design as much, but they're like the more corporate, like Faz referenced earlier, and they seem to set design tasks a bit more because they might not necessarily have a creative director in the interview that can really drill down on the kind of design talk and creative and get into the nitty gritty. So they tend to set the tasks a little bit more, I find.
Yeah, that would kind of match with my experience as well.
I think just to classically contradict that, just from what I'm seeing about people sharing their stories on design tasks, is that some of those big agencies that go on record saying, we don't ask for people to do design tasks, we don't believe in free pitching, we don't believe in spec work in general, and yet I've got people who are saying that they're being asked to complete design tasks. So why are people so willing to disagree with them publicly but still asking for them privately? Is it lack of confidence on being able to hire or thinking they can get away with it?
I don't know if it's, that's so interesting that you say that, Katie. I know of one agency that as a rule don't normally set design tasks. Obviously, I won't disclose names, but I was helping them, say, try and find an art worker, which was more of a much more technical role. And they wanted to either do a kind of trial of freelance first, because with art workers that attention to detail is just so crucial. You're meant to be like the end of the line when it goes to print, and they don't normally do them for their creators, their designers, but for their art worker they were thinking of a way that they could test someone with a brief or freelance first. in this one particular instance.
Yeah, I can totally see how that would be appealing if you're hiring an artwork position, because like you say, you just have to know that they've got the technical ability and the attention to detail. And my friend works in editorial magazine design, and she would get it fairly regularly as well. And I think it's just, yeah, I can see the appeal. But yeah, like I actually, this is probably quite a good time to make a confession. We have set design tasks in the past, but like I think it was like 7 years ago. We had a situation where we were looking for a junior designer, and we didn't want to offer internships because we just wanted to sort of commit to someone and find a junior that we could invest in and develop. And we got to a point where we had two that we wanted to hire, and we did set them a design task, and in the end they both smashed it, and we ended up hiring them, and they made it all the way to senior designer here. And I think that was 7 years ago. One of them's still here now, and one of the other ones only recently left. So yeah, I felt like I had to make that confession. Like if Katie's calling out people for saying one thing publicly and another thing privately.
Yeah, well, we appreciate the honesty.
Yeah,
I think that's really good, and I think it feels a little bit like what's going on behind closed doors, right? Which is a shame, because if people are using them, well, maybe if people are using them in a way that's kind of productive and fair, I mean, I don't think you can get a better story than hiring both off the back of it. But I think there's a real clear distinction between a software test and a practical creative task for interview, and a task where you're testing someone's thinking and ideas, and potentially on a live project is kind of problematic. So Josie, were you just, when you went into stalker mode after being ghosted, were you just refreshing their socials like every day to see if they brought out a magazine based on Cardiff life?
Yeah, to see if anything was coming up. Yeah, I don't think they did. So I think it definitely was a fake brief, but they definitely just hired a person. They just promoted someone that already worked there. So what was the point in any of the whole kind of application process? Even for them, like if they already had someone that they knew could do the job, why wouldn't you just promote them? But yeah, it wasn't a live brief. We actually, where I work now, they do set briefs, tasks, and I was questioning my creative director on it, because when I did it, they didn't set me a task, because they were like, same portfolio as before. They were like, we've seen everything that we need to see. You don't need to do a task. So I did say, I was like, why would you ever set someone a task? And it is kind of, they said it would never ever be live work. It's always kind of stuff that's already been done. And it's only if you're kind of like missing something, as I said, like if you needed a bit more web design or something.
Do you think it's conducive of good work? I know the kind of style of work that Ragged Edge does is like super collaborative, but this kind of pressured, you've got a couple of hours to impress us, off you go on your own on this brief where there might not be a huge amount of context. Do you think that creates the kind of the work that's going to get you actually in the door?
Honestly, no, I don't. Yeah, that's the thing. I don't think you're going to see the best. I mean, if we were going to set a creative challenge for a designer, it would be something along the lines of, a concept for a brand, and that's huge. But if they were to do something like that, they wouldn't have the writer that you'd be working with here. They wouldn't have the strategy. You wouldn't have the strategist for feedback. You wouldn't have all of that collaboration. So there's absolutely no way you get a good reflection of that designer's ability to work in the team. So really, no, we wouldn't do it these days. Not anymore. Learned our lesson.
Kind of harks back to what you were saying, Faz, right? About being given a huge task. Sorry, Josie. About being given a massive task that's kind of bigger than you felt like you would have been capable of.
100%. And I feel like as juniors, you could go in and be given these tasks by, an in-house or a studio, or I feel like this would be more likely from an in-house who doesn't really understand design, and they'd be asking this huge task of someone that's at a junior level. And being a young, naive, impressionable junior, you would be so keen to get a job, and you would spend like hours on end and probably do all-nighters to get this thing out. And you might not hit the nail on the head because you don't have that experience, and you don't have the expertise as of yet to have tackled that task. And you probably didn't know better to actually say that this is not where my skills lie. And you've probably set yourself up for failure, and then ruined your confidence, which is horrible. And I think it's also like there's a privilege in, like, I feel pretty privileged that I worked at 2 studios and understood, like, how to navigate certain conversations, and also understand like how I should be pricing when I went into freelance. Because I feel like it's not, I don't know, like as a junior, it's quite difficult to gauge a lot of that stuff. And so when I did go into freelancing, I had a bit of a grounding to be like, okay, these are my rates. This is what I should get paid for. This is what should be expected of me. And I was really fortunate that I had a bunch of people that I knew I could reach out to for advice and help, when it came to applying for certain things or getting connections for certain stuff, which is not what everyone has as a junior. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so final question, and without kind of putting any pressure on anyone, has anyone like heard a new opinion today that like they hadn't kind of thought of it from that point of view, or I guess had any realizations or changes in the way they would move forward? It's quite a big question.
I definitely wouldn't do another task before an interview ever again. But I do kind of see the benefit in them, but I really think they should be like small, and you can't be creating a whole new identity with like after work or in a day or two with your annual leave. So I think it's still, there's got to be a reason for it. If you're just presenting what you've already presented in your portfolio, I don't see any point in it. And I would probably push back now. And if, it's just like a ludicrous amount of work, I'd just be like, you're not going to get a true representation of what I can do from that.
No.
So I'm still like 80%, no, maybe 70% definitely would not do them, but 30% maybe.
I think for me, the new thing is that I can came from what Nikki was talking about in terms of the appropriate level of task, and also I love the idea of setting some sort of contract or rules of engagement if you are going to set a task, because I think one of the many problems that Josie you had with your experience, I think, is just the terrible communication.
Yeah.
And I think if like what Nikki's talking about, that level of agreement between people, so everyone knows exactly what's expected, exactly what the process is, exactly what the outcome would be, like if it goes this way or that way, then I think that can make it acceptable for the right level of task and the right sort of job. And that's something that I hadn't considered before.
I think what I hadn't considered before is the fact that interview tasks have like a role potentially, but for the most part, it is quite exploitative of individuals. And I think what Luke was saying around, getting designers to show early work is quite interesting way of handling that. That's not something that I had heard of before. And I think it's an interesting one to note for future reference if I'm ever trying to prove myself that I can pull something out that I'd already done. And, what Nikki had said around, showing yourself as a designer versus all this studio work.
Yeah, and then something that I would like to add is, this session's made me realise that if clients are insistent on setting a design task, that there is an exchange of time for time. So they at least provide feedback. And there's none of this kind of them being sent a task, no reply whatsoever, It just so happens people that go through us, we're the ones chasing them. Like, we can be the people you can hide behind that be like, Nikki, where's that feedback? And I'll be like, right, let me get it for you. But designers don't always feel comfortable to keep reaching out all the time. So I think that's something I'm definitely going to make sure I do going forwards, is if clients do set them, that they at least provide some feedback on why that person didn't get the job, or any ways in which they could possibly improve for future roles.
Nice.
I think that'd be great.
Great. Sweet. That feels like a really good place to wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone, for chatting today. It's been really good to have like a good mixture of experience, and thanks for honesty all round. Because I think sharing like lived experience and also maybe admitting to some past choices is really cool. So yeah, thanks everybody.
Cool. Thanks,
you.
Katie.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.